The church.
All right, the church. Today we are going to be talking about what the church is. Before we get started though, kids, if you're still in the room, because it is Family Sunday, you guys are dismissed. You can head on back to the activity center with Pastor Ian or the pre-K room with Miss Cindy. Thanks for joining us, guys. I love Family Sundays because I love that it gets a little bit louder in the room when the kids are in here, you know? And yeah, and I love that the kids got to watch us pray for the Thailand team too, because a lot of the Thailand team serves in the kids ministry. So our younger students are getting to see our older students, you know, go out in faith. So I'm so thankful for that. So today we are talking about what the church is. So like kind of the church is fill in the blank. So when you think about the church, I want you to think, what comes to mind? Maybe a specific place or a building. I've been to a lot of different churches. A lot of them look like this, beautiful stained glass windows, steeples. I've also been to churches where it is dirt floors and the roof is the sky. And I've been to churches where you meet together in a soundproof basement because it is illegal to meet together as a church. But what all these churches had in common was the people coming together to learn about God and to share his love with others. That was always the common thread. And so today, as we talk about the church, I'm not just talking about a building, I'm talking about us, the people. And you may notice, if you've paid attention the last couple weeks, one, that I am significantly shorter than Pastor Dan. He's not back from vacation yet. But also, two, that we have been talking about the I Am series. Now, this is not part of the I Am series because I actually was preparing to give this message back in March, but you may remember there was like a random crazy snowstorm one Sunday in March, and so we actually ended up canceling service, so I did not get to share my message, but I'm so glad that I get to share it today. And so kind of instead of an I Am message today, I like to think of it as like a we are. We are the church, and that's what we're talking about today. And so, if you guys wouldn't mind, we are going to be going into Acts chapter 2. Now, before we get into this, I'll give you a little bit of context, but I'll let you turn there. So I think it's actually cool that previously I was going to be sharing my message just a couple weeks before Easter. But now, last week was Pentecost Sunday, and that is actually the backdrop for the message today in Acts 2. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of context. So Jesus dies, raises from the dead, spends days revealing himself to people and teaching, and then before he ascends back into heaven, he tells the disciples to wait because a gift is coming for them. And that gift is the Holy Spirit. And so that's what they do. They wait and they're praying, and then a crazy event happens and the Holy Spirit comes down on them, and they're speaking in tons of different languages. They're speaking in tongues, but they're also speaking in all these other languages, and they are emboldened. And they share a message with these people that are there. And it was just an amazing event. And the Bible says that they added 3,000 to their number that day. There were baptisms, teachings. I mean, it was an incredible day. And so we're going to be picking up right after that because we're looking at what is the church. So these people had just seen Jesus raised from the dead. Incredible things happened. But now what do we do? Because Jesus ascended, and he's going to come back one day, but no one knows the day, so what do we do in between? And so this group of believers came together, and a lot of people call it the first church. These group of believers, and we are going to look at how they lived their lives. We're going to look at them as an example, and we're going to see what the church is. And so we are actually, before I give you the first point, as I read through these scriptures, I want you to think, how would you fill in the blank when talking about the Acts 2 church? How would you describe them in a word or two as I read through these scriptures? So we're going to start in Acts 2, chapter 42. And again, keep in the back of your mind, how would you describe these things? So in verse 42, it says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. I love how it starts off by making sure that we know these believers were devoted. This isn't just something that they did to fill their time. This is devotion. And the very first thing it says, they were devoted to the apostles' teaching. I don't know about you guys. When people think, what am I devoted to? I would love for them to be able to say that I am devoted to Scripture. That would be amazing. I mean, that's the very first thing. The apostles' teachings, they were devoted to it. It wasn't just something that they listened to once a week and then went about their day, but it was devoted. And it goes on to say they were devoted to the apostles' teachings and to fellowship. Now, fellowship is a word that we hear in church a lot, and essentially it means a group of people coming together and they have a common interest or a shared goal. And so for this church, that common interest was Jesus. They had just seen crazy, miraculous things, and now what do? How do they share his story with others? How do they show that love with other people? Now that their lives have been changed, what do they do? And so they were devoted to teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread, which is communion. We just did that. Shout out to Pastor Chris. He always does a great job. It comes so natural to him. I feel like when I do communion, I'm like, but Pastor Chris does a great job. But they were devoted to that too, right? It's not just something that they did because, it's the first Sunday of the month, so we got to do communion. But what does communion represent? Something that was so real to them, something that they had seen. It mattered to them. They were devoted to it. And later on, we'll see that breaking of bread isn't just communion. It could also be meals, but for this, communion. And then lastly in this verse, it says to prayer. Man, there are some people in this church devoted to prayer. I don't know if you've ever walked by the fireside room when they're doing pre-service prayer, but if there was ever a group of people devoted to prayer, it is that pre-service prayer team. But so think about this. These are things that they're doing now as the church. And the Bible goes on to say in verse 43, everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostle. This shows that the Spirit of God was moving in these people. And I want to take a second before we go on and continue to think, man, how would we describe this church? I just want to say that the same Spirit of God in Acts 2 that was moving and having miraculous signs and wonders, that's the same God of today. That's the same God of Willoughby Hills, Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio. That's the same God of Thailand that the team are going to. So when we read this, I don't want us to pause and think, well, of course signs and wonders were happening. These were people who had seen Jesus with their own eyes. But Jesus is just as real to us as he was to them. And so don't skip over this verse when thinking about how can we describe the church, how can we follow their example. God moves. And the Bible goes on to say in verse 44, again, think, how would we describe this? All the believers were together. Again, this is the second time we're talking about believers together. It's the second time it mentions it in just a few verses. And they had everything in common. They sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. So far, I feel like we're doing pretty good. We're reading it and we're like, yeah, we want to be devoted to Scripture and to prayer and to gathering together, and we want God to move. And then we might get to this verse that says they sold all their property and belongings, and we might say, hold up. Whoa, what are we talking about here? Do I got to go home and have this giant yard sale and sell everything I have? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but I think this changes how I viewed this first church a bit. Selling their possessions, everything they have, that's commitment to the church. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit later, but I just wanted to pause and say, let's not skip that. And it goes on to say in verse 46, every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. Again, this is the third time they're talking about meeting together. Must be important. It says they broke bread in their homes, and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts. And in verse 47, it says, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. So we're meeting together again, and then we get to this part that I love. They're breaking bread together in each other's homes, sharing a meal with it says here, glad and sincere hearts. I mean, I know Pastor Dan isn't here, but if he was, that is a yes and amen moment. We love sharing meals here at Calvary. But I want to take a moment and look at this because it's a little more personal than that, and it's a little more inconvenient than that. Because it's not just walking down to the activity center and having some real good soup and salad and fried chicken, but it says they did this in their homes. And so now we're not just talking about, taking a few steps and stuff's already prepared. We're talking about inviting people to your home outside of that 10:30 to noon window. And then we're talking about cooking. Think of it in today's context, groceries are expensive. So this becomes a little more inconvenient. But the church was doing this. They were having people in their homes. And so we're going to take a pause there, and we're going to do our first point. But when you look at those scriptures and you see how they were living, how they were treating each other, just think, what are some of the words that come to your mind? And for me, as I was preparing this, and like I said, this has been in my heart for a couple months, the first thing that comes to my mind is the word community. I think when we see church as community, we see things a little different. And I mean, just look at what they did. I mean, they sold their possessions to help each other. They were devoted to prayer and the word. They broke bread in each other's homes. They met together often. These things, to me, they describe community. And if we want to strive to take after the example given to us in Acts 2, we need to understand that church is not just about our individual selves and what we can get out of an hour and a half service, but it is about us together. It is about a group of believers who come together and are truly a community to each other. And when you see church as community, like I said earlier, you see things a little differently. You walk into church and you know so-and-so over here, they're having a little trouble keeping the lights on. They can't necessarily pay their bill quite yet, and you have the means, and maybe you don't know them that well. Maybe you've only had a couple conversations and they're not part of your pew buddies that you always sit together with, but you have the means and they have a need. And you fill that need, not because you want anything back, but because they're your community. And you don't expect anything in return but their community. They go to this church, they're your community. Or maybe you got someone over here, and you've seen them once or twice, and maybe they always sit by themselves, and they're newer, and you haven't ever really seen anyone talk to them, and you've never had a conversation with them. So you go up and you just introduce yourself. And then maybe the next week you say hi, you ask them a little bit more, you get to know them. Then maybe you invite them to coffee, get to know them a little better. What's their story? And then you do this crazy thing, which is invite them into your home. And maybe your home is a one-bedroom apartment. And maybe that meal you're going to share together is Kraft mac and cheese. But that is not what it is about. It is about the fact that they are part of your community, and they need to feel like they matter. So again, when you see church as community, it looks different. And this hits pretty close for Ian and I. We've had a difficult few months. I know he shared when he preached a couple months ago that my parents had been going through a divorce. And if you have been part of a divorce in any capacity, kids, the people going through it, family members, you know it gets messy, and it gets raw, and it is painful. And I am so thankful to be part of a church where people are asking me, how's my mom doing? They're praying for her by name, and if they passed her on the street, they wouldn't even know who she was. But they know there's a need, and they're going to pray and keep up on it. And there was a particular night that the church was really a community for my family, and I got a phone call. And during these moments, it was one of those times where my mom needed us kids. She needed us to be there. It was a difficult night, and it was late on a Friday night, and I just needed to go to my mom's house. And so I drove there, and before I even pull fully into the driveway, my mom's pastor is already there, and a couple from her church is already there. She needed her community, and they got there before I did. That was a moment where I just felt so thankful to God because my mom had a community who could take care of her, who was there for her when it was inconvenient. I mean, Friday night, this was during the school year, there's football games, there's all kinds of reasons for other people to stay home. But my mom's church community was there for her. And that's what I mean. When you see church as community, it looks different. So I know we spent a lot of time talking about church as community, and we're going to continue on and see kind of what our second point is. But I wanted to start with community because I think when you see church that way, the next point that I'm going to make is just kind of a natural overflow of that. So we're going to pick back up in Acts chapter 2. We're going to look at verse 47 again. And remember, it says they were praising God, and they were enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. I'm not surprised at all that the way this church was living their lives, the way they were living community with each other, that they found favor with all people. Man, imagine if the church could say that today, right? Imagine if the church here in America found favor with all people. And then it goes on to say, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. This makes sense. When we look at these verses before it, I'm not surprised that people are coming to know Jesus because of how they're treating each other. And so when we experience life change like Jesus, and when we treat each other like community and we're there for each other, I think a natural overflow of that is impact. And so my second point today is the church is impactful. When we have this community, when we have this place where we can meet together and be encouraged, and then we go out those doors, that's impact. And we can't just get really good at being community like here, you know? We can't just get really good with the people in this room, but it has to expand. It has to go out to the people that aren't yet part of this community, but that we want here. And I'm so glad that we got to pray for this Thailand team just a few minutes ago, because, man, talk about the overflow of community becoming impact. There are 4 students going, and I know Gianna couldn't be here today, but a lot of you guys here in this room have known Stephanie and Gianna since they were babies, since they were little. And a lot of you could probably remember Stephanie, Gianna, and Abby being in kids' church or pre-K, and a lot of you might remember Johnny when he first started coming here with his long hair. Like, we have known these kids for a long time. And it's because of your community that they feel emboldened to go to a whole other country. They're not even 18 yet. They're students still. And I think of all the ways that people in this room have supported them, whether it's financially to get them to camps and reach conferences where God moves in their hearts in such a real way. And I think of people like Pastor DeAndre and Pastor Ian who have helped cultivate in their hearts this love for missions, this love for going where you haven't been before and sharing Jesus. And I think it's just such an amazing thing to be able to pray for the Thailand team up here and talk about impact and talk about how the community that they've got here makes them feel like they can do it. They can do anything for Jesus. And that's impact. That's what we want. And so maybe you're not part of the team that's going to another country, but that doesn't make your impact any less. We have lots of events we do here locally to make an impact, but also personally, I think when church is community to you and you can come to church and feel supported, you want to grab as many people as you can to come into that. And I was going to share this message before Easter, and you might remember that we had you write down some names leading up to Easter of people we wanted to be part of this community, people we have been praying for and inviting so that they could come have a real life change and be impacted by church. And I just want to say I don't want you to give up on that. I know there are people who wrote down names and it didn't work out and they didn't come to Easter, but I want to say impact isn't just for special events. We don't just make an impact when we send a team to another country or when there's a holiday when we can invite people or special events here. Impacts happen every day. And a lot of people in this room, I'm betting, are here or have a relationship with Jesus because of an everyday encounter, because of somebody reaching out and inviting them or asking them how their day is going, a neighbor, a family member. Impact doesn't just have to be saved for special things. And so the church is community. And when the church is community, the natural overflow of that is impact in the world around them, near and far. And now we're going to look at the third point. And this one is not in Acts chapter 2, so I'm going to make you flip your pages a little bit more. We're going to go to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 and 25. And then we're going to talk about this third point here. So I'm going to read it, starting in verse 24. It says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." There are several instances in the Bible that talk about the importance of church. I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? But I really like what Hebrews 10 does here. The author helps us understand kind of the why. Let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together. You got to meet together to do that. Encourage one another. You got to meet together to do that. And I know how this sounds, okay? You got a pastor up here telling you church is important and you got to come to church and meet together. I know how that sounds. But church matters. Church matters to the people in this room, and church matters to the people outside this room, people who haven't been here yet. And so the third point that I have for us today is the church is essential. It is an essential part of your and my lives. It is an essential part of people who haven't even been here yet's lives. And so I just wanted to take a second that as we're talking about the church here, we're talking about community and impact and how it's essential. I want to take a moment to say that I understand that some people, they don't have the room in their schedule, they don't have the privilege to be able to come to church every time those doors are open. So I'm not up here trying to shame you by telling you need to be part of church, you need to come connect. I understand that that just can't happen for some people. But I think when we see the church as these things, then it's not about, man, I work 3 Sundays out of the month, so I tune in online and I can only physically be there once. It's not about that. It's about that one Sunday you're here, you're coming in here to encourage, to spur one another on towards love and good works. You're coming here with a purpose. It is intentional. And you're coming here to get filled up so that you can go out into the world and do that for others and be encouraged for others. And so, again, not trying to shame anybody if, this is the first time you've been to church in a couple weeks. I'm not calling you out, I promise. But we're so lucky in 2023 to have a lot of ways to connect as a church. We have a lot of ways. Some of you are listening online right now. How incredible is that? We've got small groups that meet online and in person. We've got Wednesday night services, and we also have kids' church at Wednesday night services for those who are interested. But we've got lots of ways to connect, and it's my hope that as we see church as essential, we are intentional with what we can do, and we make it a point to be there when we can and show up when we can. And I want to talk a moment before we go on also about, if you're hearing me talk about the church and this has not been your experience hasn't been community, your experience hasn't been impact, church hurt is very real. I know it's really hard when you come to a church, any church really, and you're supposed to have people who love you and care about you, and you're supposed to have people who are like Jesus, and then you get hurt. That's hard. That is very hard. And so I understand that this message, talking about the church so much, could be difficult for some of you. Maybe this is the first time you've even worked up the courage to come back to a church after having hurt. Maybe this is the first couple services where you are trying it again. Because when you get hurt in church, it kind of makes it feel like church is not essential. It kind of makes it feel like, well, I can have a better relationship with Jesus on my own, because then at least I'm not going to get hurt. And so I understand that it feels that way. And I'm not asking you, if this is the first couple times you've been here, or you're testing it out, I'm not asking you to do more than you're comfortable with. But I am asking you that as you're part of this journey, let us be part of it with you. When you do take those small steps, when you're comfortable and you're ready, let us be right there. Let us join you. The church is made up of imperfect people, and Acts 2 is a great example of what we want the church to be and what the church is, but they were imperfect people too. And so I hope that we could come alongside of you at any part of your journey as you do this. And I think when you see church as community and when it's really lived out, and when that overflows into impact, then of course church is essential. Of course it's essential for our families and our kids and our neighbors and our coworkers. I think, of course, it's essential. And so Hebrews 10:24 through 25 that I read earlier, I hope that throughout the week you would revisit that verse. That the next time you're debating going to church, you're not sure if you can get the kids ready in time, and it's going to be crazy getting everyone through the door, and you're debating it. I hope that you would remember Hebrews 10:24 and 25. That the goal of meeting together is to encourage one another, and you got to be together for that. And the goal of being encouraged is so that we can go and we can love and we can do good works for other people. Again, not just that we're encouraged right here, but so that it can make us excited for when we're not here, because we want to get people here, right? And so when I was writing this, I wanted to make sure I said this right. But I want you to be excited when you come through those church doors, but I also want you to be real excited to go. Not because, it's so bad here or anything, but because I want you to be excited to make an impact out there. I want you to be excited, to be encouraged to go out there. And so if Pastor Dan comes back and he hears something about me telling you guys to be excited to run out those doors, I need you guys to have my back on that one. But that's what I want. I want church to be an exciting place. And before we kind of move on and go into our close, I just want to speak to families for a second. Church is so important for families, and I know sometimes church is also hard for families because you're trying to get a bunch of kids here. I am one of 4 siblings, and we're all real close in age, so chaos, just chaos all the time. And so I know that it is hard for parents to get kids here, and sometimes, when we have family Sundays like today, kids are a little louder, especially the little ones. They're not totally sure why they're in here and not in their class. But I just want to encourage you that it matters. It matters to your students. It matters for them to be up here and see their youth leaders, who they could become in a couple years, saying, hey, I'm going to Thailand and I'm going to make an impact for Jesus. And for them to think, well, wait, Stephanie is my leader and she's prayed for me in kids' church, and if Stephanie can go, then I can go. And if Johnny, who does worship every Wednesday, I just want to shout out Johnny real quick. On Wednesdays, the kids' church also join the youth worship team. And I have asked Johnny has made it a point to tell the kids that he wants them in there. And so the students sometimes, they're sometimes feeling their games a little bit. They don't want to join the worship team, in the youth group. But sometimes they say, wait, Johnny said I got to be there. Is Johnny here today? I'll go into worship if Johnny's here today. That matters. Church is essential for your kids and for your kids who are in high school age too. Sometimes that can be just as hard as the little ones. Listen, I was a teenager too, and I was, as much as I like to think I was a good kid, I definitely gave my parents some problems. And sometimes it's hard to get teenagers here too. But that matters just as much. I think of Pastor DeAndre and all the youth leaders and how many times I've seen them praying for students, or seen them tackle heavy topics with students just because this is happening to them and they don't really know who to talk to about it. That's an important, essential part of their life. And so I just wanted to give just a quick moment to families and say, I see you. I know it is hard. I know sometimes the kids, they start out looking real nice. They got all their church clothes on, and sometimes I send them back from kids' church and they got some markers on it. I'm sorry. It happens. But I just want to encourage you. You guys are doing the good work. And sometimes it is a fight. Sometimes it is hard. But I hope you would remember Hebrews 10, verses 24 through 25. And I'm just going to read it one more time. And it's the verses of the week, I believe, in your bulletin and online, because it matters so much. Because I want you guys to have something to hold on to when you're kind of debating the church thing. So I'm going to read it one more time. It says, and let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Church is important for families, for you, even if you're just attending church by yourself. It's important for our personal walk with Jesus, and it's important for those around us in our community. And so I'm so thankful that I get the chance to share with you guys as the kids pastor and just kind of remind you of this. And I got to say, I'm reminding of myself too, because it's real easy for church to fit in that 10:30 to 12, and then you got a million other things going on, and it's summer and you're going a million different directions. But I just wanted to remind us that church is community, and sometimes that community is going to spill out of that hour and a half on Sundays. And you know what? That's a good thing. Church is impactful. You guys are going to make change when you come to church and you're filled up and you can go out and encourage others. And church is essential. It's essential to all of those aspects. It's essential to community and to impact. So as you guys leave here today, I just wanted to thank you for listening to my heart a little bit. And I hope that as you go forward throughout the week and even throughout the months, that Hebrews 10, 24 and 25 would be something that you'd hold on to and something that you would use moving forward. So thank you guys for everything. I know it's a little bit short of a sermon. Pastor Dan, he's real good at this stuff. I'm used to about 5 minutes with the kids. But thank you guys for everything, and I hope you'll remember to be the church moving forward. You go. Have a great rest of your week.